You may be a little bit surprised to be hearing me again. And I'm a little bit surprised to be standing here again. I forgot that I had 2 lectures to give, not just one. Of course, it's about my favorite topic, sustainable development, so I'm pleased to speak on that topic. I'm going to be a little bit short because I've never seen such patience as we have here. And I don't want to burden you with a long, long speech. I promise. Sometimes when I speak about this topic, though, I get carried away. So if it goes on for more than 2 hours, stop me, okay? All right. We'll make it shorter than that. What is this idea? Professor Wu has introduced it already, of sustainable development and the idea of a Green Deal for ASEAN. Why did Europe, the European Union, just last month, from all the 27 heads of government, adopt a European Green Deal? What does this mean? Why are we doing this? Well, to understand this fully, I'm afraid we have to start 200 years ago. But I'm going to go very quick in the history. 200 years ago, Cambodia was very poor and very rural. Europe was very poor and very rural. India was very poor and very rural. China was very poor and very rural. Africa, very poor and very rural. The whole world was in poverty. It was quite simple. The economy of the world was not complicated. People were farmers. And they grew crops and they tried to survive. And if the rains came, they survived, and if the rains failed, there was famine. And poverty was covering the whole world. Then, of course, the Industrial Revolution began in one part of the world, in England, because England was the first place in the world to learn to mobilize the new source of energy, steam power, the steam engine. And because England was able, with the invention of a British inventor, James Watt, to make the steam engine, and because Britain had wonderful available coal deposits, Britain was able to industrialize ahead of all the rest of the world. And so one part of the world began to industrialize 200 years ago. And that industrialization spread to other countries of Europe. And by the 1860s to the United States. And the world became a very strange, unequal place, where one part of the world, Europe and the United States, became industrial powers, and the rest of the world remained poor, on farms, in subsistence agriculture primarily. Well, remember what I said a few minutes ago. There's knowledge and there's wisdom. The knowledge of the Industrial Revolution gave vast power. And that power was also turned into vast military power. And I would say Europe had a lack of wisdom. It had a great arrogance. And it used that new industrial power to conquer large parts of the world, including this country. And so by the end of the 19th century, this region was under French control, your country, or under British control in other parts of Southeast Asia, in Myanmar, in the Malay Peninsula. And this colonial era began, and colonialism was not fun for the colonized countries. You know it well from your history. Because the countries that had the power did not want to share the power. So they industrialized, but they did not share the technical knowledge, and they really prevented Cambodia or other countries from achieving economic development. The British Empire, the French Empire, the American Empire were cruel. And the world became more and more unequal. The cruelty and stupidity of the European imperial powers, though, also turned into a nightmare of civil war in Europe as well. So these imperial industrial powers turned on each other. In 1914, they went to war with each other within Europe, what we call World War I. Why did they do it? No reason, just stupidity. They fought each other, killed millions of people. After World War I, there was massive depression, economic crisis, mass unemployment. This brought to power one of the greatest villains of history, Adolf Hitler, who began a second war in Europe in 1939, which killed tens of millions of more people. Well, I cite all of this because during 150 years, you had one part of the world which was industrial. You had another part of the world which suffered imperial rule. But by the end of World War II, the imperial powers had fought each other to death. And it gave the chance for some of the colonial powers to gain independence. The lucky ones gained independence earlier. Your country, unfortunately, experienced another 30 years of disaster after the end of World War II, more than 30 years, because you had to fight the French for independence and then fight the Americans, who knew even less. Believe me, they had no idea what they were doing, but they took over the war from France. And it took a long time, therefore, for Southeast Asia to have enough peace and independence from imperial rule to begin economic development. Finally, that spread of industrialization spread to the rest of the world, and especially to Asia. Japan, China, Taiwan Korea became industrial powers. Now, ASEAN region is experiencing rapid economic growth. And this is wonderful, because finally, this vast inequality that started accidentally 2 centuries ago is now ending. We're now experiencing the end of poverty throughout Asia, including in this country. You started late, you had the terrible experience of war, so it's taken more time, but it will happen here quickly now. This country can end extreme poverty by 2030, as the Sustainable Development Goals call for. It would have happened decades earlier had it not been for the wars of independence. So that's the good news, that 2 centuries after the start of industrialization, we're finally moving to a world in which the know-how, the knowledge, is shared widely, and in which the great gaps between the wealthy and the poor can be closed. And this is very important. Of course, it's a bit of a shock to the United States. Why? Because at the end of World War II, the United States was the most powerful country in the world. Because Europe had fought each other, had destroyed each other, the United States was not involved in direct fighting in the war in the U.S. homeland except for one day in 1941, Pearl Harbor. Other than that, the U.S. economy built up its industrial strength, and in 1945, the U.S. was producing around 30% of all the output of the world, even though it was just 5% of the world population. So, you know, the United States felt very powerful, thank you. And when you feel very powerful, you get very arrogant, as I said. And when you get arrogant, you get really stupid. So we are a great mix of power and stupidity. Great know-how, but often profound lack of wisdom. And so Americans, not the mainstream Americans, but some of the leaders, just can't understand how Asia is catching up. They don't quite accept it. And it's often said in my country, well, China's catching up because it stole all our knowledge. They can't imagine that China could develop the knowledge on their own, thank you. Which is, of course, what China is doing right now. It's a great innovating country. It's making great advances. It doesn't have to steal that knowledge from the United States. It has its scientists and engineers to develop this new knowledge. So the first problem we have to overcome is arrogance. We need the world acceptance that everybody can be prosperous. That's the commitment of the Sustainable Development Goals. That poverty will end everywhere, that technology and know-how will spread everywhere, and that well-being is a shared value. You see, Americans were told, this is the American century. How arrogant. This is nobody's century except the world's century. Everybody should share in this century. It's no one country's century. It's not China's century or America's century. It's for the whole world to share in this knowledge. But here's the other problem, and we've discussed it already. The spread of this technology is ending poverty, but it's also threatening our survival because of its environmental consequences. The side effects of our technology are very dangerous. This is often true of technology, that it looks good, but it has a negative side too if you're not careful. And with all this economic development now worldwide, if you compare the world 2 centuries ago and today, what do you see? Well, the world population has increased nearly 10 times because food can now be grown more extensively and the population of the world increased with the increase of food supply. And second, the output per person on the planet also increased about 10 times. So the total output worldwide has increased about 100 times since the start of the Industrial Revolution. But you know what? Earth itself hasn't increased at all. So our finite planet is the same, but the human activity on the planet increased 100 times. And then bad luck. We had just a bit of bad luck. And that is a matter of chemistry. The bad luck is that all that industrialization was powered by coal and then by oil and by natural gas, by the fossil fuels. But the bad luck is that when you burn fossil fuel, what do you get? You take the carbon in the fossil fuel, you combine it with the oxygen in the air, that's the combustion, and you get carbon dioxide. And that goes into the atmosphere. So what? Well, the so what is our bad luck. It turns out that carbon dioxide has a special chemical property. It traps infrared radiation. And so you say, so what? Who cares, Professor Sachs? Why are you telling us this chemistry? And that's because when we have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and it's trapping more infrared radiation from the Earth, we are warming the planet. And then you say, so what? What difference does it make? But you know it's leading to flooding, to droughts, to spread of dengue fever, to rising sea levels, to extreme typhoons. We're in trouble because of this bad side effect. And that's just one of the three major environmental crises coming from worldwide industrialization. Climate change is the first. The second is cutting down the world's forests. This is happening in this country. Why? China loves your wood. It's beautiful. You have fantastic tropical hardwoods. It makes nice furniture. There are 1.4 billion people in China. They all want nice chairs and tables made out of Cambodian tropical hardwood because it looks beautiful. If you turn around in 20 years, you won't have a forest left unless you protect it. Because the natural force of the marketplace is chop the trees, make the money, send the hardwoods, and you'll end up without the beautiful nature of this country. And without the nature, you won't have safe water, you won't be able to control landslides, you won't be able to keep the soil on the surfaces of the farms. The results will be devastating. Not to mention the destruction of all the other species that share this beautiful country with human beings. The biodiversity will be destroyed. So this is the second crisis, the crisis of land use, of destroying habitat. And it's happening all over the world now. This year, the Amazon caught fire, 40,000 fires in the Amazon in Brazil. Because they also have a president like my president, who's neither knowledgeable nor wise. So he said, go, make money in the Amazon, and now it's on fire. And then he blames other people for it. Again, greed, stupidity, lack of wisdom can destroy everything we have. Then the third crisis, also with industrialization, is there's pollution everywhere. The air in your city is filled with pollutants from the diesel, from the burning of biomass. The air quality is causing lung disease and early deaths all over the world, more than 5 million deaths every year. Premature deaths because of air pollution, all through Asia, where there's so much burning of coal, so much diesel, so much biomass burning. And so we have the crisis of pollution of the air and the water and the plastics. We have the destruction of the habitat, and we have the climate change. So the good news is technical know-how has spread everywhere to end poverty, but the bad news is where is our wisdom to use the technology sensibly so that we can have prosperity, but also environmental sustainability? That is our real challenge now. That is the challenge of knowledge and wisdom. We need the knowledge to end poverty. We need the knowledge to provide social services to everybody so that nobody is left behind. We need the knowledge to provide the infrastructure throughout ASEAN. And we need the wisdom to do it in a way that is sustainable for the planet. The problem is, I think I've said it a number of times, as a species, we're not very wise necessarily. We can be very greedy, very short-sighted. Look at my president, or don't look at him, but let me tell you about him. He wants to burn more coal, more oil, and more gas. Why? Well, it's hard to know because it doesn't make sense. But one of the reasons is we have oil companies and coal companies, and they pay money to our politicians. And then the politicians say, okay, you can continue to produce. It's just greed and corruption in the United States. And this is happening in many places. So even though we know that it's dangerous to be using so much fossil fuel, even though we know that we have to shift from coal, oil, and gas to solar power and wind power and hydroelectric power, we're not doing it because we're not wise enough to know that we have to save ourselves. Well, this is the idea of sustainable development. Be smart with the know-how to know better technologies, better ways to do things, and then be wise enough to know the difference of self-destruction and survival. Be wise enough to know social justice. Be wise enough to know that if we continue to burn coal and oil, it's your future that is at stake, the young people, because you're going to be living in a much more dangerous planet because of what stupid old people in my country are doing. So we need to get wise together. The idea of a Green Deal is to be wise in each part of the world. The European Union is wiser than average. How come? Well, maybe they were stupider than average in the past, so they learned from their mistakes. But also they have one piece of good luck. They don't have much coal, oil, and gas. So the greed is lower so they can think a little bit more clearly. And what they came to understand is it is vital to move our energy systems to renewable energy, to solar power and wind power. And they studied the problem, and they realized that within Europe and North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean, there is enough sunshine and there's enough wind to provide all the energy that they need in the future. And in the next 25 or 30 years, they could make the full conversion to renewable energy. So What did the world agree to do 4 years ago or 5 years ago now in Paris, in the Paris Climate Agreement? The world said, my God, we've got to stop the global warming. And we set a limit to say we shouldn't warm more than 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to 200 years ago. But we've already gone more than 1 degree Celsius, so we're almost at the upper limit. And the scientists tell us, don't get warmer than 1.5 degrees because then we're going to have runaway climate change. Then we're going to have real disaster. So when the scientists and the engineers have studied this problem, here's what they tell us. Decarbonize the energy system. That means stop using coal, oil, and gas by the year 2050. If you're riding a motorcycle, it should be an electric vehicle, and it should be charged on solar power. And if you're driving a car, it should be an electric vehicle. Or we should be walking and bicycling or taking the metro system rather than relying on our current fossil fuel economy. And we have to clean up everything by the year 2050. So do the calculation. We just have 30 years left to go. We're running out of time. And here's why it's so important for every region of the world to make a Green Deal and to cooperate with the other countries. The idea is this. When you study, and you will study, how to make a Green Deal in Cambodia, you will learn it will be much easier if it's done in cooperation with Vietnam, with Laos, with Thailand, with the rest of ASEAN, and with China. Much easier. For example, last year when Cambodia had a drought, where did you get your electricity from? You're buying it from Laos. When you have renewable energy, you need to have a big grid, so if it's sunny in one place and cloudy in another, you can send the electrons to where they're needed. Or hydropower, when it's dry in some place, it will be rainier in others, and the hydroelectric power can be shared. So we need an ASEAN-wide energy grid. This is why we need regional cooperation. This is what Europe recognized last month when it adopted the European Green Deal. Now, my hope is, ladies and gentlemen, that Europe and ASEAN and the three big Northeast Asian countries, China, Japan, and Korea, can all work together to make a Green Deal that spreads across all of Eurasia. Because after all, there isn't really Europe and Asia. There's one big landmass that we share together. And that whole landmass should be connected into a clean energy system with proper management of pollution and ending deforestation through sustainable land use practices. Now, later this year, Europe and ASEAN countries will be meeting together. Where? They'll be meeting here in Cambodia. What a wonderful opportunity to have an ASEAN Green Deal which matches the European Green Deal. And what a great opportunity for China, which still uses more coal than almost the rest of the world combined, to say also, we will stop using our coal because it's dangerous for us and for everybody else. And we'll join that Green Deal. And you know, ASEAN has just signed with the three plus Australia, New Zealand in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, That's an even larger area to make a Green Deal. And so what I'm hoping, ladies and gentlemen, is that you at the universities, your faculty, your engineers, but especially the students, because you have the best know-how, and it's your future at stake, will work together to design a path to environmental safety and prosperity. In other words, design the path to sustainable development. Today, we signed a partnership between Sunway University and the University of Cambodia. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to work together on how to make an ASEAN Green Deal, because we can engage universities all across the ASEAN region. I was yesterday at the National University of Laos. They're very interested as well. And universities in Indonesia are our partners as well. Universities across ASEAN can partner with us, but we need to make the strategy quickly. We need to work fast because time is running out. And so I called on all of us to work for peace. Let me say that achieving sustainable development for all will be the surest way to guarantee peace for all. And with peace, there is nothing that we can't accomplish together. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and how honored I am to work with you.